Dumb it down for me. Dumb it down. Dumb it down for me. Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out Europe Explained for Americans.
What is it about Americans and Paris, or Americans and Tuscany, or most recently, apparently, Americans and Mallorca? Many Americans have long romanticized Europe as this jewel of ancient history and culture, but what even is Europe? What do people mean when they talk about it? Where is Poland? What about the Balkans? What about Turkey? Is that still Europe? And the question on everyone's lips, where does Russia fit into this? Isn't Russia also part of Europe as well? I'm originally from the UK. I've been living in Germany for over a decade, and these are some of the questions that I want to explore today, because if you ask 10 Americans to point to Central Europe on a map, you'll get 10 different answers. Most Americans, actually, I would say most people in general, like their mental map of Europe, at least people who are not from Europe themselves, it stops at France, Germany, and maybe Spain. Beyond that, it's just all this kind of vague blur of the East or Slavic or somewhere near Ukraine. And woe is the man who makes the mistake of calling a country Eastern Europe. Everyone seems to want to distance themselves from that label because it's not just a comment on their geography. It's a kind of code for less developed, ex-communist, and many countries want out of that category. Poland sees itself as Central Europe, so does Hungary, Austria, and even parts of Germany. But where does Central Europe end, and where do the Balkans begin? And why does nobody seem to agree? You know, I guess the real question here is, how many Europes are there? It sounds simple enough.
Hang on. I thought I know what Europe is, but now I feel like maybe I don't. Y'all, this is Brit in Germany. I think his name is Benjamin. We've exchanged emails, and he seems like a cool guy. Be sure to go to his website, his YouTube channel, and like and subscribe. I am subscribed. I'm going to go ahead and give it a like. It's free, and it helps him. Thank you, Benjamin. But first of all, show me on a map. Without even thinking too much about it, when I think of the center of Europe, I guess I think Switzerland. But it's so far west now, really. And I do think of, I guess I think of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine as Eastern Europe. But there's Central Europe? Is that what he's saying? Well, he's saying Poland is Central Europe, and that is farther west than those countries. Interesting. What was Majorca? I don't even know where Majorca is. I don't even know how to spell it. It's in Spain. Oh, it's a little island in the Mediterranean. Oh, beautiful. Yes, beautiful. I'm not surprised that it's beautiful. Beautiful. Very, very beautiful. Okay, why do we have such a boner for Europe? I guess to us it means like history. We learn about it in school, in humanities, and it's kind of the origin of Western culture. Maybe that's why. Anyway, dumb it down for me, Benjamin. Explain it to me.
The question here is, how many Europes are there? It sounds simple enough, but it really isn't. You know, if you ask a geographer, they'll tell you Europe stretches from Iceland in the west to the Ural Mountains in Russia. That's kind of the textbook definition. You know, it's a subcontinent defined by tectonic plates and mountain ranges. But if you ask a politician, they'll probably say something about the EU, meaning the 27 countries with shared laws, open borders, and Brussels breathing down their neck. But then that excludes countries like Norway and Switzerland and Albania, and yes, even parts of the Balkans that desperately want into the EU. Now, if you ask somebody from the UK, you know, depending on their age, of course, you might hear something like fog in the Channel, or Europe is over there somewhere. Like, quite honestly, this video is much for Brits as it is for Americans, because many Brits do not see themselves as being part of Europe at all. And
he did a great video about that, and I reacted to it. Maybe check it out. Maybe watch his version first, and then watch me react to it, maybe. That would probably be cool. But it's very interesting. I learned a lot in that.
If you don't understand this, I did a whole video on it here. You can check it out after this one.
Where?
Up here, I'll link it
Oh,
somewhere.
there it is.
So which one is it? Geographical Europe is seemingly clear on paper. Political Europe is in flux. And cultural Europe is completely up for debate. And that's even before we get to emotional Europe. You know, the one people imagine when they dream of sitting in a Parisian cafe or eating Sachertorte in Vienna or hiking the Alps or sailing the Croatian coast. The one Hollywood romanticized for decades and that just doesn't really actually exist. There's no single definition of Europe. There really are quite a few, and some of them overlap. Some contradict each other, and you know, the confusion isn't just semantic. It shapes how nations see themselves and how others see them. And this is why countries like Georgia and Moldova and the Ukraine, they desperately want to be seen as European. And the complexity is increased by the sheer number of languages spoken here and the absence of any official common language across Europe. Learning German has been one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life, which is why I'm very excited to bring you LingoPie, who are kindly sponsoring this video.
Y'all be sure to go to LingoPie and buy a language.
So, who belongs where? What is Western, Central and Eastern Europe? This is where things really start to unravel. Like most Americans, or quite frankly most Brits, they will refer to everything east of Germany as Eastern Europe. Like Poland, Eastern, Hungary, Eastern, Romania, Bulgaria and the Baltics, definitely Eastern Europe. Except they're not. I mean, at least not according to the people who actually live there. Ask a Pole or a Czech or a Slovak where they live, and they will probably say Central Europe. And this is not just a geographic correction, it's a cultural statement. You know, it's a way of saying we're not post-Soviet, we're not Balkan, we're not some eastern outpost of Europe, we're at its very heart. And this matters because, you know, these labels, Western, Eastern and Central, are never neutral, they always come with baggage. Western Europe has long been synonymous with prosperity, with liberal democracy and modernity. And Eastern Europe still evokes the ideals of communism. It is just the fact that these countries feel different. Like,
hang on. What? I feel like I should know this, but what countries were Soviet? What European countries were Soviet? Oh, got a map. Show me the map. Where did that map go? Okay. Eastern Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia. Okay, interesting. Wow. The Soviet Union went way, way further west than I expected. All the way over to here. Germany, Czechoslovakia. Wow. But they consider themselves Central Europe. I mean, I guess they are. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to get my own mind out of that thought.
Evokes the ideals of communism. It is just the fact that these countries feel different. Like, even just walking around the city of Berlin, you can often feel the difference between West and East Berlin, even though so much has changed since then. Central Europe tries to sidestep both stereotypes by reclaiming its medieval and Austro-Hungarian legacy, a legacy that predates the Cold War and often complicates the East-West binary even more. So what about the Balkans? Good luck getting a clear answer there. So geographically, the Balkans refer to the southeastern peninsula, countries like Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, and Bulgaria. But culturally...
Yo, if you asked me where Bulgaria was on a map, I wouldn't be able to show you. Moldova, Romania, Serbia, Turkey and Greece, yeah, I can point those out. But not Albania, Kosovo, or Serbia. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to. Thanks, Obama. Just kidding. Thanks, Grandma, Grandpa.
Countries like Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, and Bulgaria. But culturally and politically, it's a minefield. Like, the term the Balkans was originally used by the Ottomans, which is the Turkish word for mountain, specifically like a chain of wooded mountains. And it was never really used by the locals themselves. And so for many in the West, the term Balkan often implies conflict, instability, ethnic tension, largely due to the wars in the 90s. And so so many people in the region, they really resent this label. Identity there is really complex, and not least of all because the borders have shifted so often. Like, this is one of the things that makes comparing the US to Europe, as in US states to European countries, totally meaningless, because it's just such a different situation. And then there is, of course, the question of Russia and Turkey, and this is not even about Americans or Brits anymore. No one can seem to come to a consensus on this. If you ask 10 Europeans if Russia is part of Europe, then you will probably get 10 different answers, each tinged with history, ideology, and their own kind of trauma.
I don't consider Russia part of Europe. Is it? Let's ask the robots. Is Russia... Oh, it came up right away. Yes, Russia is partly in Europe and partly in Asia. Really? What do they say on Reddit? This is probably a stupid question, but is Russia part of Europe or Asia? Oh boy. To me, it's both. This is the correct answer. It's both. Continents are fuzzy concepts, blah, blah, blah. It's a transcontinental country. Russia is in the Eurasia continent. Interesting.
You just can't get a yes or no answer. It always requires context and a story. Like, geographically, the answer is kind of a simple yes, but then again, not really, because only part of Russia, not the whole of it, is part of Europe. Only around 25% of Russia's landmass lies west of the Ural Mountains, which traditionally marks the boundary between Europe and Asia. And that portion includes cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. These are cities which culturally have played a huge role in European history. But politically and psychologically, the question is really anything but simple. You know, for much of modern history, Russia has been Europe's great contradiction. A civilization that gave the West Tolstoy, Tchaikovsky, and Dostoevsky, while simultaneously terrifying it with tsars, gulags, and tanks. Russia has always occupied a liminal space. It's too vast, too authoritarian, and just too other to be fully European, yet too historically intertwined to be excluded. And so even in the post-Soviet years, its position remained ambiguous. Then came Crimea and the Donbass, and suddenly for much of the West, the question wasn't, is Russia part of Europe, but should it be? Today, many Europeans, especially those in the Baltics, Poland, and the Nordics, they reject any notion of a shared European identity with Russia. The war in Ukraine didn't just redraw borders, it redrew Europe's moral map. And
Wow. That's very interesting. So Putin is trying to get all that Soviet land back, but he's really just he's pushing the people away. That's probably an understatement. When I hear myself say that, he's doing a lot more than that.
Russia, for many, now sits decisively outside of it. And then there's Turkey, another borderland nation caught between East and West, culturally rich, militarily strong, and historically enmeshed with Europe through the Ottoman Empire. And Turkey has long flirted with the idea of European belonging. It's even been a formal candidate for EU membership since 1999, still not been accepted. Because as with Russia, the question is never just about geography, it's about values. It's about democracy, press freedom, human rights, and whether Turkey's political direction aligns with the EU's evolving identity.
I thought Turkey was in the EU. I don't know.
And so this is really the crux. Europe is not a neutral geographic concept. It's a story we tell about ourselves. And like all stories, it includes and excludes based on who's doing the telling. And so just to boil this down, I would say there are at least 3 different Europes, and most people kind of mix them up without realizing it, and that's why there's so much confusion. So there is geographical Europe, political Europe, and cultural Europe. So on paper, Europe is a continent, but it's a strange continent, more like a peninsula than a landmass attached to Asia and sharing the vast Eurasian land plate. And that's why definitions vary. Some exclude the Caucasus nations like Georgia and Armenia, others debate whether Cyprus, closer to Syria and Greece, should even count, and even the UK.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Turkey is right next to the Middle East. It's connected to it. But then Greece is too. It's right there. That's one of the reasons I love maps. Visualize it.
like post-Brexit, is often spoken of as if it just drifted off into the North Atlantic. So geography alone is just not enough to explain Europe. It's not enough. You have to then go into political Europe, which is very confusing. There's the EU, which is the most ambitious political project the world has ever seen, but being in Europe doesn't mean being in the EU. Norway, Switzerland and Iceland are not EU members, but they are unequivocally European, both in identity and alignment. Meanwhile, you have countries like Turkey and several Balkan states. They have been EU candidates for decades, but, they still haven't crossed the threshold into the EU.
What are the requirements for being in the EU? I'm curious. What are the requirements for being in the European Union? To join the EU, a European country must meet the Copenhagen criteria, which require a functioning market economy, stable institutions that guarantee democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and protection of minorities, and the ability to take on the obligations of EU membership. A country must be European, promote EU values, and be able to fully implement EU laws. Okay. Yeah, democracy is a big thing. The human rights thing, that's...
You've got NATO, a separate alliance with its own geography. Turkey is in NATO, but not in the EU. Austria is in the EU, but not in NATO. Finland and Sweden recently joined. Ukraine wants to join. Russia is doing everything to prevent that from happening. So the politics get really very messy very quickly. And political Europe is very different to geographical Europe. And finally, there's cultural Europe. Perhaps this is the hardest to define and the most emotionally charged. This is the Europe of Beethoven and Dante, of liberal democracy and secular values, of Christmas markets and university towns and high-speed trains. It's the...
He just listed a lot of stuff that are like evoke a lot of nostalgia, and I know exactly the cultural stew that he's talking about.
Of Christmas markets and university towns and high-speed trains. It's the imagined community that tourists dream of and politicians invoke. But it's also where the deepest tensions lie. Everyone talks about the US as being this amazing melting pot of multicultural immigration, which... it's not false, but what about the cultural and political entity of Europe? Like, nothing like that has ever been tried in the history of the world. Like, the idea that you can just look past years and years of war and destruction and shifting borders, like, that actually goes against human nature, and that is what makes it so special. The problem is, who gets to define European values? Is it the bureaucrats in Brussels? Is it the Catholic heartlands of Poland, or is it the post-national elites in Paris and Berlin? When Hungary or Italy moves to restrict migration, are they defending Europe or are they betraying it? Is Europe Christian? Is it secular? Is it multicultural, postmodern? No one really agrees. But at least for the moment, this is a battle of ideas, not bodies. And that was kind of the whole point of the EU. So if you are American, don't worry, you're not alone in finding Europe very confusing. It is just very difficult to define.
Thank you.
And everything we've discussed here just makes it so elusive. It's not a single civilization, but a palimpsest, layer upon layer of contradiction. You've got Catholic and Protestant, Latin and Slavic, liberal and authoritarian. It's a place where boundaries have shifted so often that some villagers have changed countries several times without ever moving. And yet...
Yeah, that's another thing that I find fascinating, is that the map of Europe that we know today is really only from World War II. It's only 80 years old, and it's still changing, like he's saying. Wow.
There is something distinctly European in the very awareness of these contradictions, like the ability to hold multiple identities in tension. The very idea that you can go supranational is very European. No one else has even conceived of trying to attempt this. We'll obviously see what happens if it actually works, but to sit in a cafe in Paris and critique the entire system in 5 languages with 3 passports in your back pocket, that is the very essence. The very idea of Europe is, and I think always has been, a debate. That's what makes it so frustrating to outsiders and fascinates those who stay, because it's really alive and it's changing all the time. And so why does any of this matter, especially to someone from Austin or Alberta or Manchester? Why does this matter? Because the story of Europe is still the story of the West. It was European thinkers who exported ideas like rationalism, nationalism, capitalism. It was European wars that shaped the current world order that we have today. And it's European integration that set the template for post-war peace, and European disintegration that signals its potential unraveling. And so when Europe struggles with its identity, it reveals cracks in the broader Western psyche. And so Europe is often the first place where cultural tremors are felt. The rise of the far right, the backlash against globalism, the decline of religion, the loneliness epidemic, the bureaucratic bloat, these are not just European stories, they are canaries in the coal mine of modern liberal democracies. Wow.
Wow, he's saying so much right there. I gotta rewind it and hear that again. And I before I forget, I also want to mention, he said that a lot of people do compare the states in the United States with countries in Europe. But it's a totally different thing. Because in Europe, those countries were at war for a long time. Or not at war for a long time, but there have been times where they were at war. Probably more than once. And now they're all getting along for the most part. There's different languages. That's very different than the states in the United States. There was a time when the North and the South were at war, but it was just once. And it's been a long time since that happened. We are politically polarized, but it's very different. It's much simpler than the countries of Europe getting along. That's very different. And people say the United States is a melting pot. It is. But Europe is a melting pot. Europe is often the first. Okay.
It reveals cracks in the broader Western psyche. And so Europe is often the first place where cultural tremors are felt. The rise of the far right, the backlash against globalism,
the rise of the far right, the backlash against globalism,
the decline of religion,
the decline of religion,
loneliness epidemic,
the loneliness epidemic,
bureaucratic bloat,
yes. Wow. It all starts in Europe, or you see it there first.
These are not just European stories, they are canaries in the coal mine of modern liberal democracies. What happens in Sweden's elections, in Poland's courts, or on the French streets during a pension protest ripples far beyond the borders of Europe.
Yeah.
And so, I have a tendency to go a little too deep with these topics.
No, do it.
But if you're American, this might seem like overthinking, but in Europe, identity is largely inherited. It's not chosen. Like, we don't really have anything like the American dream. And whether you believe that the American dream is dead or alive, the fact that that idea exists is incredible. And so if you really want to understand Europe, you can't stop at croissants in Paris or castles in Bavaria. You really have to go deeper and ask deeper questions like, where do the Balkans begin and end? Why do some Poles bristle at being called Eastern European? What does it mean to be European in a world where global power is shifting to the East? And perhaps the most important question of all, can a continent built on division ever find unity without losing its soul? That's really the tension that defines Europe, and it's the reason why understanding it matters now more than ever before. If you're American or British or from anywhere else across the world, I highly encourage you to come and visit some European countries. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of you. Take it easy, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Benjamin. Y'all be sure to go to Brit in Germany and like and subscribe. That was fascinating. I feel like such an ignorant American right now. But I guess that's good. I'm learning stuff. We're so isolated over here.
Can a continent built on division ever find unity without losing its soul?
Yes, you can. Yes. Find it interesting. He said they don't have anything like the American dream, and you could debate whether the American dream is dead or not. Listening to him talk, though, before I watched this, I would have said, the American dream's not dead, it's just not very attainable right now. But now listening to him, I'm like, no, it's very much alive. We have it so good, because we're not dealing with all that. We are, you know what I mean. We're very isolated, and we're not worried about some other country attacking us. Although, I don't know. It could happen. It could very well happen. There's so many different cultures right up against each other. different languages, different histories. That's fascinating. It is strange how around the world all these common issues start popping up, like immigration, authoritarianism, fascism. It's all coming back around again. It's kind of weird. We're all connected, I guess. I don't know what I'm saying. My mind is kind of blown by that. Makes it feel all very fragile. Wow. Well, well, I'd like to thank my patrons. I'd like to thank my Buy Me a Coffee folks. Thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see y'all next time. Later.